Hey everybody, welcome back to 10 to Life. My name is Elise, and I'm here to break down another true crime case for you. I hope you guys are all having a good week. I apologize in advance because I feel like if you are having a good week, I'm about to just swoop right in and dump all over it because today's case, obviously none of them are easy to listen to, but today's is extra savage and grotesque. It involves a teenage boy, an axe, an argument. It's not good. It's really unsettling, actually. The more I think about it, the more I'm getting the chills. You can't even see it, but guys, get ready because it is a doozy of a case. If you are brand new and you haven't ever been here before and you're like, hey, who is this weird chick with the tattoos and the weird attitude? My name's Annie, and this is 10 to Life, where I just hang out like you guys are good friends, besties of mine, and I tell you about a true crime case that I've been researching and that has been kind of given me the ick, and I just feel like I need to share it with you. So I apologize for that long-winded intro. My name is Elise, and let's dive right in. All right, fam. So I recently decided I need to rebrand myself. You see, I came across Sofia Richie on TikTok, and I decided I want to dress like her, which I think all of the cool kids call it quiet luxury. But I realized that when I do this, one of the easiest and quickest ways to achieve that would be through my fragrance. No more millennial cucumber melon or VS pink. It is a luxury smell time, but on a budget because my dad ain't Lionel Richie. And luckily, the service that is helping me do that is also today's sponsor, Scentbird. Scentbird is a fragrance subscription service with tons of different perfumes and clones available, hundreds. They let you choose a new designer fragrance to try every single month for just $17. And it isn't just some random fragrance that they send you. They hope you like it. You get to pick what you want to receive every single month. There are no surprises. They have luxury designer brands like Prada and Gucci, and also brands like Clinique and Juicy Couture, and you can choose whichever ones you want. Now here is the game changer for me. With each fragrance, you get a 30-day supply, so you can try it out before committing to a full-size bottle that can cost over $150 and sometimes $300 to $500. It totally takes the risk out of it if you either aren't vibing with the scent or if you just want to continuously change up your scent like me as I try and figure out what is quiet luxury versus what is dusty old corner of an antique shop. It's a 30-day supply. It comes in this amazing bottle with this little travel case. It is so chic, so cute. So let me show you what I picked this month. I picked L'Or de la Ville by Nicole Miller, and it has notes of jasmine, vanilla, and amber. I also grabbed Sakura by Ormond Jane, which is a super soft floral scent, and Vesper Glitz by Ex Nihilo, where it has a little bit more spice and kick, perfect for date night. Just smells so good. But even better, if you use my coupon code Annie55off, you will get 55% off, making it just a little over $7 for your first month. The value is insane. Scentbird is available in the USA and Canada, so snag this deal while it lasts, grab your fragrances, and start living your best smelling life. Remember, that is code ANNIEOFF55 for 55% off. In 2009, Denise Hallowell was a 57-year-old teacher in Citrus County, Florida. Denise was born and raised in Florida, and she had lived there all of her life. She was known to be adventurous and very talented in multiple different things. She was athletic, smart, a skilled musician, and just an all-around gifted person. She was fun and always made anybody she came into contact with laugh. She was also the type of person who always tried to include everyone, and because of this, for many people, she felt more like a sister than a friend. Denise also loved animals, and that love actually led to her becoming a certified veterinarian technician. Eventually, in 2007, she started helping teach at a veterinary science program for high schoolers, before later becoming a full-time science teacher in 2010. Denise had a passion for her job. She was always reliable and created a very nurturing classroom environment. Because of that, she was extremely loved, not only by the students, but also by the fellow staff, as they got to know her personally. They just loved her. She was a great joy to be around. Now, Denise had been adopted as a baby, and because of that, the topic of adoption was very important to her, and she felt like she wanted to pay it forward and adopt herself. So in 2006, Denise adopted a little boy from Guatemala who was just 4 years old, and his name was Carlos. Unfortunately, Carlos's first few years of life were incredibly traumatic, and when Denise brought him to the United States, he had significant struggles, which were ultimately diagnosed as PTSD. But despite having PTSD struggles at such a young age, Carlos was able to thrive, both athletically and academically. As he got older, Denise really felt it was important for Carlos to experience having a sibling like she did growing up. So, in 2011, she finalized the adoption of another little boy named Angel, and Angel was from Honduras. Now, unfortunately, things were far from smooth sailing within their household, which I've learned is something that most adoptive families have struggles with, due to the trauma that the adopted child endures prior to coming to their house, and oftentimes because of the severed bonds, and oftentimes also being placed with people that they don't know, or just jumping from home to home. And this was no different for the Hallowell boys. And sadly, the people around them and the animals around them would often take the brunt of their pain, anger, and trauma responses. You see, by the age of 11, Carlos had already become addicted to alcohol and drugs like cocaine, meth, and ecstasy. While Angel wasn't necessarily doing those things, he was known to run away, and it was something that happened often. On the morning of September 19th, 2015, Denise ended up calling the police because Angel, who was just 12 years old at the time, had run away again. 4 hours later, Denise found him in a neighbor's shed. Because of the circumstances, the police conducted a follow-up investigation at the Hallowell home, and what they found was pretty disturbing. Angel's room had a lock on the outside of the door, and all of the windows were nailed and boarded shut. In his room was a mattress, a bucket, and just a couple of books. When Angel was interviewed, he claimed that Denise was harming him both physically and verbally, saying that she would lock him in that room, not feed him, and make him use that bucket in place of a toilet. He said that Denise and Carlos would hit him, and that Denise often made him clean the bathroom entirely naked. At the time, investigators also felt that Angel looked malnourished, and they were about to see that he had bruises and scratches all over his body. So because of what Angel was saying and the things that were found in the home, CPS had grounds for immediate removal of the kids, so they removed them and they placed them into a temporary foster home. But because of the details of the case, not only was it a child welfare case, but it also became a criminal case. Denise was arrested and charged with child and aggravated child. Word spread around very quickly, and it wasn't long before the school district terminated her employment. At the time, that made the most sense, and it would reduce the risk for other children. She was in jail for 2 weeks before being released. But over the next few months, the police continued to investigate. Carlos adamantly denied everything that Angel was accusing Denise of, and said that she did not hit or starve Angel. Carlos said that Denise was actually an extremely loving mother, and that Angel was the one hitting her. When Denise was interviewed, she had said that the reason that his windows and doors were locked was for his own safety, because again, he would run away all the time. She said that the bucket was in his room just in case he couldn't make it to the bathroom in time. Police were able to look at Denise's private journal, which had multiple entries over time that explained the problems that were happening with Angel. She wrote about how violent he was at home and at school, and she wrote about having to sleep outside of his bedroom just to prevent him from running away. Not only did they read through her journal entries, but they also spoke to people who knew them. One of Denise's friends said that Carlos and Denise were often scared that Angel would do something to hurt them. So over time, the reality of what was really happening behind closed doors started to show, and the truth started to trickle out. Angel's story was continuing to change with each interview, and they didn't have any evidence to support the allegations that he was making against Denise. What they did have evidence of was Angel's violent and destructive behavior. While in foster care, Angel had lashed out at his foster parents, and he attacked them while threatening to accuse them of child harm as well. Mental health counselors, pediatricians, school staff, and people who knew the Hallowell family all spoke of Angel's behavioral issues and the fact that he was impulsive and could become violent at any given time. During a court hearing, the judge simply asked if it was possible that Angel could have a reactive attachment disorder, or RAD for short. Now, RAD is something that can happen when a young child isn't able to establish a healthy bond with their parent or main caretaker. RAD often affects children who have been adopted because that bond or connection was straight up interrupted or severed. Ultimately, it doesn't allow them to form bonds very well, and they're often really avoidant, have an overall sense of just being emotionless, and in quite a few cases, they can become very violent. There are some mental health professionals who believe that during those violent episodes, the best thing to do and the best place for a child is to put them in isolation, without anything stimulating around so that it allows them to calm their body down. In Denise's case, they found that she had also spoken with her pastor and Angel's doctor to figure out how best to help him, which is why she was doing the things that she was. Now, I am not going to claim that I would do those things to my child, but I also am not a parent who has had a child with RAD and has walked that path trying to do right by my child, but also keep them, myself, and my other child safe. So because of the judge picking up on Angel's struggles, in February of 2016, after a 5-month investigation, the prosecutors announced they were dropping the charges against Denise. But because of the situation, Denise's life had been significantly changed.
Denise Hallowell may never fully have her life back, but she is just anxious to clear her name. This is really a story of the justice system, relying on evidence and witnesses and ultimately finding an accused woman to be without blame. It is what she's been trying to prove from the very beginning. For 5 months,
situations are not always what they seem.
Denise Hallowell's life has been in limbo.
She'll never be the same person because in the back of her mind, we've rattled this woman and this family's foundation.
It started last September with a 911 call. Her youngest of 2 adopted sons was missing. Citrus County deputies found the 12-year-old hiding in a neighbor's shed.
He begins to tell them how he didn't eat, punished with food, he's abused by his mother, he's locked in his room for hours on end. These things are patently false.
But deputies arrested her, calling it one of the worst cases of child we've seen in a very long time. At face value, it sounded awful. Both her children were taken. She lost her job as a teacher, all the while trying to explain her son suffered from behavioral and anger issues. Sometimes a lock was the only thing keeping him from running away.
He is troubled. I had logged 3 years worth of behavior on my youngest son as trying to manage this and take notes. I offered that immediately on that day. That was also ignored.
The accusing child was placed in foster care, but soon came reports of violent outbursts, that he struck the foster parent and threatened to accuse him of child. Based on his behavior and willingness to make false accusations, the state attorney's office said it's unlikely a jury would find the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
The government didn't null pros or drop the case. They never filed it.
Hallowell was cleared.
It's been a total of 5 months, and a nightmare for 5 months.
Pictures of Hallowell's sons tell a very different story. There were fishing trips, raise games, and vacations.
I am a forever mom.
While her legal troubles are gone, she faces a new battle. Google the name Denise Hallowell and you'll see the damaging headlines. For now, she carries this piece of paper, proof that accusations don't always mean guilt.
Don't be quick to judge, and that's exactly what happened here.
Eventually, she began a new job at a center for children with autism, and Carlos was able to return to her care as well. However, because of the issues with Angel going so deep, he wasn't able to go back to Denise's. After that, he was placed with a foster family, where he continued to have the same violent outbursts. He eventually ran away from that foster family, and no one really knew what happened to him afterwards. Although Carlos had defended Denise against Angel's claims, their relationship really wasn't that great, and as time went on, it just kind of got worse and worse. Carlos also had violent outbursts and would often get into trouble at school. And in addition to that, he was kind of known to be a little bit of a player, and he would often sneak girls into his room at night, which obviously upset Denise. He continued to be dependent on various substances and even started dealing drugs, which was obvious to the neighbors because there were constantly cars just coming and going from the house. The neighbors also noticed that as soon as Carlos and Denise moved into the neighborhood, animals began going missing. One neighbor had hired Carlos to pet sit for her chickens while she was gone on vacation, but when she came back, one of her chickens was found dead with a hammer through the body and left on her front porch. There was also a time where her cat went missing, but was eventually found dead and cut in half on her front lawn. Now, while she never knew who exactly was responsible for the death of her pets and the grotesque death of her pets at that, her experience with the chickens made her suspect Carlos. Like I explained earlier, the relationship between Denise and Carlos was very rocky, and the two of them had a hot and cold relationship. One minute they would be totally fine, and then the next they were fighting and screaming at each other. The neighbors often overheard screaming matches between the two of them, because Denise was frustrated with Carlos's party lifestyle and the fact that he was not performing well academically. She was working so hard to make ends meet as a single mother, and Carlos's behavior really just added more stress onto her plate. Now, as Carlos continued to get older, his mental health struggles only seemed to get worse. When he was 16 years old, he attempted to take his own life by crashing into a tree. He was physically fine, but obviously his truck was not. Eventually, as things continued to get worse, he began cycling in and out of the house. Him and Denise would get into these huge arguments. She would kick him out, and he would stay with friends and neighbors until things would calm down, and then he would come back. But the cycle just repeated, over and over and over. Now, if you thought that that was as bad as it could get, you apparently don't watch a lot of true crime and haven't heard a lot of cases, because unfortunately, things became far worse by 2019. In January of that year, Carlos was kicked out of his private high school because of his drug issue. Initially, he kept it from Denise, but she did end up finding out later on. So after that, there was a time where a fight broke out between the two of them, and the police were eventually called about the domestic dispute. Denise had broken her wrist and got a concussion, but she told police and friends that Carlos didn't do this to her, and that she had just fallen down on her own. She admitted that they had had a heated argument, but said that they were able to work everything out. Now, obviously, police and Denise's friends were suspicious of it, but nothing could be done to Carlos unless Denise wanted to press charges, which she, of course, did not want to do. Eventually, it was discovered that Denise had actually whipped Carlos with her keys, so Carlos had punched her in retaliation. Clearly, they were both playing a part in the arguments and the violence, but it's really unfortunate that Denise tried to hit her teenage son instead of modeling healthy coping skills. After that, Carlos continued to struggle with substances and then tried to take his own life once again, however, this time through overdosing. However, Carlos really depended on Denise during that time, and while they would have good days, the arguments still continued. They argued about the same things over and over. Carlos's performance in school, where he was going to go to college, and his use of drugs and money. The relationship between the two was anything but healthy. In May of 2019, Denise finally found out that Carlos had been expelled from school 4 months prior. Denise was super upset about it, and after already having that bad fight where she had broken her wrist and gotten the concussion, she ended up kicking Carlos out of the house. Again. This time, he went to live with his friends Stephanie and Damian Irving. The couple had a lot of experience with Denise and Carlos, as Carlos had lived with them before, and they often overheard the arguments between the two of them. Stephanie believed that living with Denise wasn't good for Carlos, as she was verbally harmful. Stephanie would even record conversations between herself, Carlos, and Denise to have proof of how Denise talked to him, and how she felt it wasn't fair that Denise had these high expectations for Carlos and that she expected him to contribute financially when he was only still just a teenager. So while living with Stephanie, Carlos began taking Prozac, which is an SSRI that's often used to treat OCD, panic disorder, and depression. So clearly it was a step in the right direction. On top of that, Stephanie and Carlos's girlfriend Kayla noticed that there was a huge difference in his overall behavior when he had started living with Stephanie and Damian. Stephanie claimed that you could almost feel his constant anxiety disappear now that he wasn't living with Denise. However, Kayla thought that his improved behavior was because Carlos could basically just do whatever he wanted while living with them. Because Stephanie and Damian didn't have many rules for Carlos, and that's exactly what he wanted. His biggest complaint about living with his mom was that she was constantly trying to control him and tell him what to do. And now he had free reign to do whatever the heck he wanted. But after a few weeks, Denise wanted Carlos to move back in. But Carlos and Stephanie weren't sure if moving back in with Denise would be the healthy decision for him. Even Denise's friends didn't think that having Carlos move back in with her was the best idea, which, honestly, I kind of agree, considering it almost seems like the two of them could barely be in a room together. People that knew the two of them were concerned for Denise's safety, as she had made some very concerning comments in the past, like asking her friends to care for her pets if something ever happened to her. Her friends also noticed that Denise had installed security cameras inside of the house just in case anything happened. But Carlos didn't want to upset his mom, so he created a list of pros and cons about not moving back in with his mom. On the con side of the list, he wrote that if he didn't move back in, his mom might not talk to him again or help him financially with college, since she had been diligently saving money for that. On the pro side, he wrote that living with his mom would grant him more freedom and stability. Carlos created a list of demands for Denise and said that the only way that he would move back in with her was if she agreed to this list, and he was going to get her agreement formally notarized to ensure that she would stick to it. The list included things like providing him with a car, paying for him to go to college, and overall supporting him financially. Eventually, Carlos and Denise were able to reach an agreement, and Carlos moved back in on June 12, 2019. Now, I just find all of that very interesting because it seems as though Carlos was the one dictating the relationship, the parent-child relationship, where that dynamic should have been Denise dictating it. Never have I ever heard of a teenager or even young adult say to their parent, here's my list of demands in order to live with you. I'm going to also have it notarized so that you hold true to it. Like, what are you going to do with this notarized piece of paper? Excuse me, judge, my mommy didn't get me the car that she promised she was going to. Like, it's bizarre, but it just kind of illustrates the dynamic between the two of them and the power struggle and, in my opinion, kind of who really thought they ran the show. Now, because of the circumstances of going back to Denise's, Carlos had a falling out with Stephanie and Damien. But even though Carlos thought this round at his mom's would be better, nothing changed between the two of them. And instead, the neighbors just continued to hear screaming and fights coming from the family home. On July 13th, 2019, Carlos and Denise attended a funeral in the morning before going home and going to their rooms to take a nap. Carlos woke up in the afternoon to the sound of his dogs barking in the backyard. Now, because they weren't supposed to be outside, he went to his mom's room to ask her for help to get the dogs back inside. And shortly after that, a 911 call was made that would change everything. Carlos called 911 and said that when he walked into his mom's room, Denise was laying in her bed with an axe plunged deep into her skull. After the 911 call was made, the police quickly arrived and began inspecting the scene, while investigators took Carlos to the station for further questioning. Carlos started by telling the investigators about the funeral and said that they went to lunch together after, he had pie for dessert before going home to take a nap. He explained how the dog's barking woke him up, and that's when he went into Denise's room to get her help. That's when he found her, dead, with an axe in her head. Before they went any further, they read him his Miranda rights, and he agreed to continue speaking. He told the investigators about his relationship with his mom. He said that they loved each other, but they would argue sometimes. Because of this, they often spent time away from each other, occasionally watching a TV show together or a movie together, but kind of lived separately for the most part. He started retelling the police about what had happened that day. He told them that he and his mom drove to the Tampa Bay area earlier that morning since they were attending the funeral of one of Denise's longtime friends. They left the Tampa Bay area around 11 a.m. that morning, and they stopped at a pie store along the way. They purchased 2 pies and then drove home. They arrived home around 2 p.m., and they each ate a slice of pie before returning to their respective rooms for a nap. Carlos said he watched a few YouTube videos, texted some friends, and turned on his TV before falling asleep. He woke up a couple hours later to those dogs barking outside. However, he could hear that they were on the other end of the house. So apparently this was weird and out of the ordinary, as the dogs usually didn't have access to that side of the yard. He went outside to see the dogs and then went to his mom's room to ask for help getting them back inside, and this is when he discovered his mom's body. Carlos said that she was breathing when he first went into the room, but he didn't want to do CPR because he didn't want to move her and potentially hurt her even more, so that's when he decided to call 911. The police asked him if he heard anything going on in the house that afternoon, but Carlos said no, he didn't. He was a really heavy sleeper, and things didn't usually wake him up, but he did say that the front door and the gates were wide open, which was unusual. He also said that the axe belonged to them, and it was usually locked up in the back shed. He said that the keys for the shed were in the garage, and neither he nor Denise had been in the shed for a couple of days. The detective brought up how he had told an officer that he had touched the axe that day. So Carlos quickly corrected him and said he had touched his machete and was sharpening his machete, which was something that he regularly enjoyed doing. Okay, to each their own. The conversation seemed to continue on and on about the same things, but eventually, Carlos suggested that his brother Angel might have been the one to have done this. Now, he hadn't been seen in over 4 years, and obviously Angel and Denise left things on a very bad note. However, investigators were able to quickly dispel that when they realized that Angel was in prison at the time, and he could not have been the one who hit her with an axe. Throughout the interrogation, many things stuck out as odd to investigators. They found it weird that Carlos said that she was breathing when he first found her, because with how mutilated Denise's face and head were, they felt like it was highly unlikely that she was breathing. And this was because the axe had gone almost all the way through her entire skull. They noticed a lot of inconsistencies in his story as well. For instance, he said that he was a deep sleeper, and that's why he didn't hear anybody was in the house. But if he was a deep sleeper, how would he have heard the dogs barking on the other side of the house? How would he hear that, but not his mother being brutally murdered by somebody with an axe? When police started questioning him further about these things, his story started to slightly change. His news story was that before he fell asleep, he actually went outside to the shed to check on his tools because he was going to chop wood after his nap. He went to the bathroom and then went to his room, shutting the door and turning on the TV. Just before he fell asleep, he heard his mom leave her room, and he assumed that she was just getting a glass of water or cup of tea like she often did before sleeping. A neighbor had told investigators that she had heard Carlos and Denise arguing and yelling at each other earlier in the day, but when it was brought up to Carlos adamantly denied it. He said that they did have bad moments and bad days, but they were actually fine that day, and they hadn't argued at all. They did have an argument the previous day, but it was just a little argument, and this one was about college and finances. The investigators began mentioning to Carlos that it was unlikely for a stranger just to walk into a home and commit a crime like this. But as they continued to press him, Carlos started getting angry. He was starting to realize that the police were looking at him as a suspect, and he kept saying over and over how much he loved his mom, and how he would never, ever do something like this to her. One of the officers told Carlos that he remembered dealing with Carlos and his mom in the past, and even back then, he thought that Carlos was acting sociopathic, all because his emotions seemed forced and fake. And up until that point in the interrogation, Carlos had been pretty emotionless. But the second he realized that he was being accused, he snapped, became angry, and even began insulting the police officers, telling them to do their job.
So I don't know what you guys are trying to get out of me right now, but I didn't do anything and would never do anything to my mother like that. As much as we used to bicker and get back at each other, fighting sometimes, and then peace, and then back and forth, and then peace again, never in a million years would I ever think to do that. She's my mom. I was adopted at age 4, and I've been with her forever.
Yeah.
Would never do such a thing like that. And if you're insinuating that, I'm very offended by that.
You're putting on a pretty good show.
A show?
Yeah, you're putting on a really good show.
A show?
Yeah.
How's this a show?
Because I remember the whole interviews with you back when all this went down.
You remember that?
Yeah, I was in charge of the Major Crimes Unit then.
Okay.
So, and I remember that CPT talking about how your attitude of things were very sociopathic.
Sociopathic?
Which is exactly what you're showing me right now. And you're trying to act like you're upset about something.
Trying?
Yeah.
Okay, how is this trying? That was my mom. My mother.
Right.
So trying, how is this trying?
Because you don't feel like normal people feel.
I don't feel like normal people feel.
Yeah, that's what a sociopath has the issues with.
Okay, so you're calling me a sociopath?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. This is what sociopaths do.
Well, do what?
I've just been sizing you up the whole time, and
okay.
It's like 100%.
Okay, you can size me up.
You don't have normal feelings.
You can size me up all you want. I do have normal feelings. I loved my mom. Ask anybody in this county. They can attest to that.
Do you think that people that love one another don't do the most extreme things to them?
Not like that, no.
That happens all the time, every day.
No.
That's what I just told you earlier, that it's usually like a loved one.
Okay, I would not do that. You ask anybody in this county. My mom and I were amazing. We would never do such a thing like that to each other at all. My mom would never hurt me like that, and I would never hurt her. You call me a sociopath or whatever you want. I'm sorry for getting upset. But you please ask around. Ask anybody.
They will ask everybody.
Ask everybody. They will attest that I would never do that.
Carlos was at the station for a total of 6 hours and was eventually released to child services. The police asked Kayla's parents if Carlos could live with them for the time being, but this entire situation obviously made her parents really nervous. They didn't want their daughter's boyfriend living in the same house as her, and they also felt like Carlos was acting suspicious. and they were not the only ones. Many people said that Carlos was acting very strange. He eventually went to live with Denise's friend Amy, who said that she would lock her door at night and sleep with wasp spray next to her bed because she was scared and didn't want to take a chance of him doing something to her. Which, if you're that scared, maybe don't let him come stay with you. I don't know, just a thought. But throughout the whole thing, Carlos didn't even seem sad, and that was what really irked everybody the most. While we can never judge people for how they grieve, as everyone does it differently, Carlos didn't even seem to care that his mom passed away, and in such a brutal way was murdered. And he was the one to discover her with an axe in her head. One of his friends was so irked by this that they even started secretly recording their phone calls because she had become so suspicious of Carlos. Another stated that Carlos never seemed sad that his mom died, but instead, he would talk about how excited he was to inherit her money, the house, and the cars. Sounds greedy, doesn't it? Sounds like there's a little bit of motive, right? So on September 16th, 2019, 9 weeks after Denise's death, Carlos was brought back into the station for questioning. Investigators had discovered many things that they wanted to ask Carlos about. The jig was almost up. Or was it? When they were initially searching the home after Denise's death, they noticed a very weird spot on the table. The entire table was covered in dust, except for this one spot. Basically, it seemed like something was there, but had been removed later. They had also found instruction manuals and plug-in cords for security cameras, which made them think that a security camera was probably what was sitting right there on the table. However, they couldn't actually find these cameras. But eventually, they were able to pinpoint Carlos's movements before and after he called 911, which gave them some clarity and some direction. Carlos had previously said he was in the house when he called 911, but his phone movements indicated that he was by the lake behind their house at the time of that call. Well, a dive team searched that lake, and they found 3 security cameras as well as Denise's phone. The investigators told Carlos about this and showed him the cameras, but Carlos acted like he had never seen them before. He claimed that there was only 1 security camera in the house, not 3. When investigators asked him what else he thought they found in that lake, Carlos immediately replied, "My mom's phone." Weird. Are you clairvoyant or a medium or what, a psychic, whatever it's called? Because the only person who should know that her phone was in the lake would be the person who put it there, right? So faced with question after question, Carlos's story changed yet again. He now said that he and his mom did have an argument that day, an argument that started on the way home from the funeral. They were arguing about college, since Carlos wanted to go to a 2-year technical school while Denise wanted him to go to a more traditional 4-year college, and that she wouldn't financially support him unless he did exactly that. He still said he went home, took a nap, and after waking up went to the shed and got that axe and started doing work. He wanted to chop wood, as this was something that apparently he did often to get his anger out after arguing with his mom. So he briefly sharpened the axe inside the garage and then walked inside to get a glass of water. But he says he wasn't sure what happened after that. The next thing he knew, his mom was dead, and the axe was in her head. He panicked, grabbed all of the security cameras, her phone, and then went to throw them in the lake before calling 911. He confessed, saying he knew that he was the only one who could have done this, but that he didn't remember anything else because he blacked out. Now get this. After confessing, he stated he felt better getting it off of his chest. So then he started asking questions, like if he would have a record and if this would affect his chances of going to college. Again, showing no remorse for what happened to his mom and only being worried about himself, which, yeah bro, if you just confessed to taking an axe and putting it in your mother's head, I think it's a safe guess to say you're not going to college. Probably not. Probably table that for a minute. You'll probably get your GED or go to college in prison. Who knows? So Carlos was arrested on the same day, obviously, and was charged with first-degree murder. Carlos pleaded not guilty to the charge of first-degree murder, and then the question became how to try him. A grand jury eventually decided to try him as an adult, and his trial began 2 years later in July of 2021. While he still admitted to killing his mom, he claimed that it was not premeditated. In order for something to be considered first-degree murder, it has to be found that the person was planning on killing someone and didn't just do it in the heat of the moment. So Carlos was hoping to only be charged with manslaughter. During the trial, prosecutors spoke of his apathetic nature and how everyone around him thought he was acting so weird after his mom died and all of the things. How he didn't seem to even care and cared more about what he was going to inherit after her death. They said that Carlos was always mad that his mom didn't give him enough money, so maybe killing her was his way of fixing that issue. With her gone, finances wouldn't be a problem anymore. Multiple psychologists also testified at the trial, saying that Carlos had antisocial personality disorder and that he fit most of the criteria to be considered a sociopath. I'll say. They also said that there was a little hope for Carlos to be rehabilitated. Forensic analysis also testified that there was no evidence of forced entry in the home, meaning that the murderer had to have been inside the house. However, the most important thing was for the prosecutors to prove that Carlos planned this, and they had just the evidence to prove that. Specifically, the data from his cell phone would go on to prove that Carlos did in fact plan on killing his mother. The cell phone data showed that he actually never took a nap. He was using his phone all throughout the day. It showed that Carlos went to the shed and then went back inside. He was inside for about 26 minutes before walking into his mom's room and killing her. 26 minutes is a lot of time to sit and think about what you're going to do. He didn't get the axe and immediately kill her like he initially made it out to be. Instead, he got the axe, he sat, sharpening it, all while thinking about what he was going to do to his mom. He had 26 minutes to turn back, change his mind, put the axe away, but he didn't. Instead, he went to her room, brutally murdered her, and then tried to cover his tracks. They argued that the entire motive for killing Denise was because he wanted her car, her land, and her money. The trial lasted for 3 days, and on July 9th, 2021, the jury deliberated for only 1 hour and 25 minutes. They found him guilty, and Carlos was eventually sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, but with a sentence review in 25 years. Now, this came after quite a bit of debate through testimony. One mental health professional stated that Carlos had antisocial personality disorder and met 16 of the 20 signs for psychopathy. But at the end of sentencing, the judge said there is no rehabilitating a psychopath. Now, this case is a tough one because I think we can all agree that the relationship between Denise and Carlos was not a good one. It seemed like there were some questionable things going on in that house. One could even argue that Carlos was a victim as well, but that does not negate his crimes. What he did was awful, even if he was also a victim. Two things can be true at the same time. What we do know, and what we can agree on, is that Denise did not deserve to die. She was savagely taken from this earth, and her family and friends miss her dearly. They will always remember her for her fun and adventurous personality, and deeply cherish the time that they had with her. I'm curious to know what you think about this case. Was it premeditated? Was it a moment of rage? Did he black out? What do you think the truth is? Let me know in the comments below, and if you appreciated the case coverage, please don't forget a free and easy way to support the channel is just by hitting that subscribe button below, and that way you won't miss any other true crime videos, and again, it's just a way to show support. So, thank you Scentbird for today's sponsorship, and make sure to use my coupon code ANNIE55OFF for 55% off your first month. Thank you so much, and until the next case, stay safe.